Welcome everybody, my name is Darlene Brace, and she, her, ella pronouns, and I work for Inner City Health Center in Denver, Colorado. We are a tiny FQHC lookalike clinic. We're working on that certification. And so we're here, we have two clinics, and I go between both. I'm the behavioral health director. Welcome, come on in. So we're gonna talk about compassion fatigue, vicarious trauma, burnout, kind of all of the topics around this area, but my biggest hope for this presentation is that you guys walk around or walk out with some ideas, tangible ideas that you guys can implement with your teams, your staff, suggestions you can make to your administrative people, all of that stuff. So we've got a lot of stuff to cover. At the very end, I'll leave it on a slide that has my email. If you guys want copies, like a PDF of the slides, I'm happy to email those to you just because I put a lot of information in here so you guys could take it with you because I'm not gonna read everything on every slide. Sound good? If you have questions, go ahead and hold them off till the very end and we can spend some time answering questions, or I'm happy to walk out in the hall and answer questions. Does that sound good? So, yeah. So let's just take a couple of moments as everybody's walking in to kind of get settled in your chairs. We'll spend a moment here just getting grounded. So if you want to close your eyes, you're welcome to close your eyes. If you want to leave them open, just kind of gently rest them on the ground. But just kind of settle in, however you need to get comfortable. And I want to invite you to just start to notice your breathing, the rise and the fall of your chest. You don't have to breathe any differently. We're just noticing our breathing, perhaps noticing our heartbeat, perhaps noticing our stomach, sensations in our stomach. I invite you to notice your feet, bring awareness to your feet, maybe wiggle your toes around in your shoes, press down into the earth. Just give your feet a little attention. We spend a lot of time on our feet during the day, and sometimes we don't notice them until they're giving us very strong sensations, perhaps of pain, but just notice your feet for the moment. And just bring your awareness up through your calves and your sit bones. Notice the gravity of earth holding you to the earth, keeping you grounded, keeping you centered. If your mind wanders, that's very normal. Just bring it back to your breathing or my words. Start to bring your awareness up through the middle of your body, up your spine, maybe into your shoulders. If you need to move your shoulders a little bit or stretch in any way that feels good to your body, just making natural movements. I invite you to bring that awareness up through your neck, into your head, perhaps into your jaw or your tongue, your brow muscles. Sometimes we hold tension there. If you do notice you're holding any tension or tightness, feel free to breathe into it. And as you exhale, release it out. You can give it to God, your higher power, creator, the universe, whatever your belief system is. But just breathe into the tightness of your body and exhale, releasing it up and out. And just spend a couple moments. If you want to pray, you're welcome to pray at this time. If not, just you can try some mindfulness or just notice your breathing. And I invite you back to notice your breathing once more. Perhaps there was a shift in your breathing since we started. Perhaps you're breathing the same. There's no right or wrong way to do it. We're just noticing the present moment. And as you're ready, go ahead and bring your eyes back open, look around, maybe look to the side of you, make eye contact with somebody who's near you, right? They say the eyes are the ways to the soul, so as we look at each other, we see each other, right? Thank you so much. I appreciate that. So as a therapist, I'm a licensed clinical social worker and an addiction counselor, and it's really important in the work that we do when we do trauma work to start on a positive note, to resources, we call it, or to attach to something that feels positive or neutral or enough. And so I always like to start presentations that way. So I thank you for joining me in that. As we dive into the harder subjects of the matter, I'm not going to go through all of the terms. I'm pretty sure everybody in this room has heard most of these terms. But I've been a social worker for about 16 years now, and I've burned out a handful of times. And so this is why it's really important to me to do this work and talk about how not to burn out, because the work is really important to me. And the first time I burned out, I was working with survivors of family violence and partner violence, and I'd done that work for 10 years, and it's just hard. I was in a small community. You see your neighbors go through hard times, you see your classmates go through hard times, or their children go through hard times, and it starts to get with you, right? So that's a part of what happens when we get called to do this work, is we have, vicarious trauma happens, or secondary trauma, where we also take on some of the trauma as we hear the stories of people sharing trauma, right? The compassion fatigue is also very similar, right? It's just the cost of caring and doing this profession, whether you're a doctor, an MA, a front desk staff. However you do it, we open our hearts to folks, and in that we give of ourselves. And sometimes we give so much that we deplete ourselves, right? So a lot of the theme of this conference has been, thirsting. And when we find we're at a point to thirst more, where do we go to fill our cups? So how many of you guys have heard of the term organizational trauma? Okay. Organizational trauma maybe is a newer term for people, but really essentially what it means is that the organization is traumatic. It could be toxic, it could be disorganized, it could be chaotic. But when an organization functions this way, it causes undue trauma to the employees of the organization. If you feel like this rings true, feel free to look up the term and learn a lot more information. I'm not going to talk about it too much, but it's something to really talk about, as we want to have healthy organizations. We want to have healthy families of people that work together, because if we're working with folks who are struggling with so many ailments, and we are also struggling with our manager, the organizational chaos, it makes it really hard for us to be able to do our work and show up 100% for our people. So the second time I burned out, I worked in an organization that was very chaotic, and when I had quit that job, I thought, I can't do this anymore. I'm not going to be a social worker. And I was lost. I didn't know what to do in my world, and I took a couple months off. I got some really good therapy with my favorite therapist ever, and I realized it wasn't me that was wrong, it was the organization. Like, I thought, what did I do wrong? I'm not a good social worker. I'm not doing it right. It was the organizational culture I had got embedded in, right? And sometimes we don't realize we're in it until we're in it so very deep, right? So we also, how many of you guys have heard the terms moral distress and moral injury, right? Those terms became big in the last 4 years, especially with COVID coming about. So moral distress is also something we face in our professions, being in the medical field, whether you're dental, doesn't matter. It is the distress that we take on when we can't help. It's the stress of not having enough resources in your community to get to the people. Okay, we need to get you to a dentist. You don't have health insurance, we don't know where to send you. But I can see that there's a tooth decaying in your mouth, right? This causes us moral distress because we have the values, the morals to help this person, to do no harm, right? To be helpful. And moral injury happens when moral distress continues to go on and on and on. It also happens when we have to place certain values above other high values, or having contrasting values. So during COVID, it happened when we still went to work and put our lives in danger of getting COVID, and then still having to go home and then potentially exposing our loved ones, our vulnerable ones in our community, right? We put one value above another, but those are both very high values, but it causes a lot of distress in that way, or injury. And moral injury is much more severe. You're going to see more severe symptoms that come out of it, perhaps anxiety, depression, guilt, shame, a lot more physical ailments and things like that. So everybody take a breath. I know that's hard things to talk about. I'm not going to read the statistics. We all know that people are burnt out in our profession. We know that people graduate med school burnout. Tons of statistics that show more than half students graduate med school being burnout already, right? So this is a really big thing that we all see in our professions. Whether you're in med school, you're in dental school, you're an MA, you're a front desk, it happens in our profession. So I like to talk about the Yerkes-Dodson law. It was actually from like the early 1900s. They studied this. Has anybody seen this before? This? Okay. The information from these infographics it comes from a website, but it's all in the resource manual that I have in the back. But basically, what they studied is there's an optimal level of stress. So as you can see, it's on a U-curve. You've got stress on the bottom and performance on the top. So if we have too little stress, no, it's good. If I don't give you a deadline to get done with things, oh, okay, cool. I don't get it done. I might procrastinate. I might put it off. I don't have that optimal stress level. The optimal stress level comes when we have a little bit more stress in this area. But we have to be mindful not to go over the curve and go into too much stress. Right? This is kind of the difference between eustress, the good stress, quote unquote, if we'll call it, and stress and distress. And distress is all the way in the red, right? We don't want to be in distress hardly ever. And we don't want to be in exhaustion. We don't want to be in too much stress. But as you guys also know from being in the medical field, most of us probably thrive on some elevated level of stress. Maybe we have a higher tolerance for stress. It's part of working in this field. So everybody's stress levels are going to be different, and how we perceive stress is going to be different. Each and every single one of us is going to have a different level of optimal stress, right? But the idea is to stay in this optimal level, not to go over too much, right? Because then we start coming into the anger, panic, burnout, breakdown, shutdown mode. So the biggest influencers of stress or trauma are predictability, time limited, and controllable. If we know those three things, we've got this. We know when it's going to end. I know how to do this. We have an I can attitude. So if you're coming from like polyvagal theory, which is it's a trauma theory, but stress and trauma are one and the same in the body. They're the same release of hormones and activation or deactivation. So when we know things will end, we can push through. I know I'm going to graduate in 6 months. I got this. I'm exhausted, but I got this, right? Oh, I know I'm going to get married in 1 month. I can handle 5 billion text messages about A, B, and C, right? If I feel like I have control in the situation, a little easier to weather. So keep in mind that these are the influencers of stress, because sometimes we don't have control of things. We can't predict when things will be or end, things like that. And also the time thing is very hard, especially for people who've experienced trauma. They feel like their emotions will never end. They feel like whatever they're in will never end because their trauma was not going to end in a predictable way, usually, unless it was a one-time trauma, which rarely happens for folks. We are working with folks who have had, I'll go through it, but very complex trauma for the most part. So again, you guys know the stress cycle. I don't have to educate you on it. But I do want to highlight that a lot of new neuro research is really highlighting, we used to say fight, flight, or freeze response, right? Fight or flight is the part of the nervous system that says, I can attack, I can move, right? Or I can run away from it. If we have I can't, that's when we go down into the immobilization, which is the fawning, the freezing, or the flopping. So fawning, if you guys haven't heard that term, it's like people pleasing, it's faking through it. So it's a way to fawn through things. Freezing is numbing, dissociating, checking out, right? When you ask your patient, hey, what do you remember from our last talk? And they say, I don't know. Perhaps they weren't completely present. And we also know trauma impacts memory. So, and then flop or collapse. All this to say, we have to keep an eye on adrenaline, cortisol, because those are the two main things that happen in our system when we're stressed out. But they're not meant to be on, right? They're like a faucet. If you're not supposed to leave the faucet on or it depletes the whole well. You're meant to turn it on, turn it off. Turn it on, turn it off. So that's ideally what stress is supposed to be. We're meant to be in a relaxed position that, like, most of you guys are in right now, which is rest and digest. So there's a lot of types of trauma out there. There's acute trauma that maybe is a one-time accident, perhaps like a car accident or a one-time event, We have religious trauma. Yes, I'm going to say it. We have religious trauma. And what religious trauma looks like is people have been damaged by religion. If you guys haven't worked with that or seen people who come to your areas, it happens. Some people have been hurt deeply by religion. Maybe it's not your religion, maybe it's not Christianity, maybe it's not whatever, but some people have been damaged by it. And so I just keep an eye that there is such thing as called religious trauma. We have complex trauma, which just means these people have experienced a lot of trauma. So we see complex trauma a lot with our veteran population, with our survivors of partner violence, family violence, and sexual assault. Ongoing, like child abuse, neglect, things like that can often be what shows up as complex trauma. Now that's not a diagnosis in the DSM-5 where we diagnose things, but it is an occurrence in a set of symptomology that's been researched and studied and is very different than some of the other types of trauma. Developmental trauma shows up during those developmental years. So in the early childhood years, we have that prime development. If trauma happens during that time, it changes our brain and our nervous system in such a way that looks very different from the other forms of trauma. So that's how developmental trauma shows up. We have historical trauma, generational trauma. We've got really awesome studies that have come out with epigenetics showing how our genes have changed from generation to generation because of a trauma that happened from our grandfathers, our grandmothers, our great-grandmothers. So it's not only does our body physically change, but how we respond and react to stress in the world continues to be passed down through generation and generation, right? The trauma gets passed down from generation to generation. Really fascinating research and things out there. I will also say, when I was in grad school and I learned about this, I cried, and then the teacher said, but we also pass on resiliency to generation, to generation, to generation, right? So for every, bad, quote unquote, I don't think there's any bad thing on, but for the hard stuff we pass on, we also pass on the way to get through it. And then we have secondary or vicarious trauma, which is the trauma that somebody can experience not by having seen the event or been there during the trauma, but hearing the story retold to you. This is the trauma that we take on as providers. Even MAs, you're sitting there, you're asking this, that, and whatnot, and they say, my mother just died, and they break down crying, and they tell you how she died, and they share the details, and you walk out of the room really overwhelmed because you took in some of that, because our hearts are open, because we love, and our nervous system takes that in, right? We had cortisol and adrenaline go through our bodies, so what do we do to take care of ourselves, which is a big part of working through all of this. So this is a really cool chart, and I encourage you guys all to go to responderalliance.com, because that's where the Yorkie Dodds chart came from. That's where this one is, and we'll reference it a couple times. But I just take a minute, because you've got the green zone, the yellow zone, the orange zone, the red zone. Red is critical. We don't want to be ever in critical. We might be injured, we might be reacting. But take a look at the different ways that people show up. And maybe think, where would you fall on this chart today? Where might you fall? Because if we're in that optimal stress, being really good, we've got the right amount of stress, we have a sense of mission. We have a strong sense of our spiritual beliefs, our spirituality, our emotional health. We are physically healthy. We're not having stomach aches every day. We're not having tummy aches. We're not chewing Tums all day long, right? Those are symptoms. Those are messages from our body saying something's not right. Look at me. Even if it's emotional, right? Even if it's spiritual. Healthy sleep, gratitude, vitality, and room for complexity. When you have staff that can't wrap their brain around a complex case, that is a high indication that they're burnout. And we have high complexity cases all the time, but when folks are really struggling with that, maybe they need to take a break, they need to take a day off, they need to do some form of self-care. I'm not going to go through all of these because you guys can read the symptomology, but it kind of gives you a gauge for yourself. Where do I fall on this chart? What does it look like? So the Surgeon General 2 years ago released a really great packet, it's in your resource thing, that talked about healthcare workforce and what we can do to cultivate resiliency. So I'm not going to go through all of this, but I will say, as healthcare workers, we experience a lot of heart disease, diabetes, insomnia, interpersonal challenges, exhaustion, and lack of empathy at times, right? These are the costs of doing the work that we do. But when that happens, we're less patient with our patients. We spend less time with our patients. We're rushing to the next one. We're not fully present as we're sitting with somebody because we're thinking about the person before because we didn't write that note, and don't forget to put that thing in the chart or whatever it be, right? When that happens, we also have more shortages in our healthcare system, where we're at, often many of us are at, and you have this erosion of trust, which trust is pretty foundational to all human relationships. So there's a lot of things that we can do at these different levels. So societally and culturally, a lot of these things like health misinformation and mental health stigma has been a big part of kind of where we are landed today. We also see like a lack of leadership and, policies, state policies, funding, lack of funding shortages, things like that. All of that stuff have really impacted all of that. Limited flexibility, limited autonomy, lack of culture in your organization, right? You want to have a really strong culture, whatever that means. I attended a session and they asked, what are the top 3 values of your organization? Can you all answer that right now? What are the top 3 values that your organization has? If you can't, that's a really good conversation to have with your coworkers, to have with your admin team. Because I feel like I can answer that. I don't know if my CEO is in here. I don't know if he would say the same thing. Our medical officer is in here. I don't know if he'd say the same thing. But generally, we all have this idea that we want to be of service, that we want to be humble, and we want to have high communication, right, and be effective. Those are big values that we have. It doesn't matter what job we do. So I want to know for you guys, if you guys haven't done this, if you can scan the QR code, or you can text this code up here, the 71653066. I want to know from you guys, what are you already doing, get out of the way, to support staff? Any innovative programs? Are you giving them extra mental health days? Are you giving them time off to go to the doctor, to the dentist? What are you guys doing? Because it should update as you guys start sending things in. What are you doing to support staff? Maybe not. Oh, there it goes. It's going. CCHF, love that, right? This is a great place to come to get more support, to feel connected, to invigorate. Prayer, supervision, EIP therapy, right? Wellness classes, love it. Prayer together, lots of praying together. Days off, I love that even. I love that. We've got lots of good stuff coming in. Fellowship with each other. Flexible schedule, I'd love to learn more about that. Let's see, wellness classes, Bible study. I'll give you a second more if there's anybody else that's sending things in. You guys are doing some really great things to support staff. Offering help, having a good supervisor, a good manager, a good director, right? Praying for them, understanding traumas, understanding trauma, providing trauma-informed care, right? How many of you can say your clinics are providing trauma-informed care on every level? Do your front desk staff, are they trauma-informed trained? Are your MAs trauma-informed trained? Are your PAs, are your NPs, are your doctors, are your dentists? Right, because I have a lot of clients that come to me because they were anxious in the dentist chair, but the dentist wasn't explaining things to them, right? Not necessarily at our clinic, because our clinic's great, but they've gone to other dentists that they just stuck their hands in there and they were going to pull out a tooth, and I didn't even know they were going to pull out a tooth. That's not trauma-informed. Trauma-informed lets people know what's happening. They create predictability. They say what they're doing before they do it. They give options. They let the patients know what they can do, right? Beautiful. Lovely. Thank you guys for participating, trying to, switch it up a little bit. So what can we do for our organizations? We can look at cultivating workplace culture to empower our workers, to listen to their voices and their needs. Not just asking them, not just doing surveys about, well, how was this last year? What do you need? Listen to them. Make tangible changes. Because when they see actions, that builds more trust, right? So listen to your workers and what they're saying they need. Show them how much they're valued, right? Do you say hello to them? I'll give you a story. When I first started where I work, the CEO walks around every day and says hello to everybody by name, looks us in the eyes and says hello. Now, the first 2 weeks I was there, I was like, is he checking on me? Like, I don't know. But then I realized this is just what he does. He goes around to every single person in that clinic that works there, and our patients too, and says hello, right? When we, as all workers of our clinic, say hello to all patients in our clinic, they feel welcome. They feel like they have a team. That's trauma-informed. When I know the front desk staff members by name, they feel like they're on my side, right? So showing people lots of different ways to show people you're valued, and that might be your love language or just kind of on your own value system, but show them they're important. Build a commitment to health and safety of workers, right? Whether it's physical health, whether it's mental health or spiritual health. Right, I think because we're at this conference, we're all really good at spiritual health. And so we have to also make sure that we're blending in the physical health and the emotional health, right? So making sure people have access to mental health services and substance use services if they need it, without stigmatization, right? We want to combat bias, racism, discrimination in our workplace. We want to cultivate inclusivity. We want to invest in health prevention, right? We're preaching to the choir, right? Going upriver, we got to start with prevention. But we have to start with ourselves, right? We want to create psychological safety, which is inclusion, being able to learn safely, being able to contribute or voice your opinions safely, and being able to challenge safely. If you don't feel like you can challenge your director, your boss, that's not psychological safety. If you don't feel like you can voice your opinions in staff meetings, that's not psychological safety. So being able to cultivate this, right? So there's a lot of ways to do that. So there's different tools. This comes from Mind Tools, but you look at different areas of life that we want to have health and wellness in. Business or career, like how satisfied are you on a scale of 0 to 10? 0 is in the middle, 10 is at the top. So, you could say, oh, I'm at like an 8, right? Where am I at with my finances? Ooh, I'm at a 6. What about my health? How's my health? Oh, I'm at a 5 with my health. Where am I at with family and friends? Oh, maybe I'm at a 7. Where am I with romance and relationships? Maybe about a 5. How am I doing with my personal growth? Oh, I might be at like a 7. I just came to this conference and I just learned a lot, right? Fun and recreation, ooh, that's not very high, right? When you're looking at that, you can go, ooh, that's not so great. Physical environment, and you can switch these up because there's also, this comes from the 8 dimensions of wellness. Has anybody heard of those? No? SAMHSA? Several years ago, probably even like 10 years ago, SAMHSA created the 8 dimensions of wellness. All of this stuff is free online. I'm not giving you any exclusive things. These are all free things that you can get online for your staff. They've got workbooks, they have everything. But it's the same kind of concept, except they say these are the 8 dimensions that we need for wellness. And spirituality is on there, right? Finances are on there. Physical environment. Do you live in a safe place, right? We ask our patients, I ask the patients, how's your neighborhood? Do you feel safe walking in your neighborhood? Because a lot of our patients don't. A lot of our patients hear gunshots all the time. A lot of our patients hear things. A lot of our patients don't go out after dark, right? That plays a role in how we show up in the world. Friends, recreation, fun, finances, believe it or not, I hate to say it, but they do also play a role in how we think. So SAMHSA has a lot of great stuff around the 8 dimensions of wellness and a lot of activities to learn a lot more about the different dimensions. But it's a really great tool you can do with your staff, you can do with your team, you can do it as a team building activity, maybe do it at annual reviews, however you kind of want to work it. So this is a really great conversations of joy. How are we cultivating joy in our workplace? So this is my son after my daughter was born last year. She was teeny tiny. I know everybody goes, because this brings me joy. My kids bring me joy. My family brings me joy. But how are we cultivating joy in our workplace? How are we having conversations with our staff? So these are some questions you can ask, maybe on a daily basis, maybe a weekly check-in, right? What helps make it a good day here, working here? When we're at our best, what does that look like? When you're at your best, what does that look like? When our team's at our best, what does that look like? And what gets in the way of a good day? Ask these questions to get some answers, to maybe get some feedback as to how things are working in your team. There's also, so this comes from this Ed Hub, the AMA, but key talking points to engage leadership. So if you feel like your leadership isn't quite on board with wellness activities or maybe some of the ideas that you're proposing, because sometimes if we're saying we want to give extra days off, what does that come down to in our clinics sometimes? Money. Well, we can't afford to give that time off, or that's not in the budget, or we don't have any other person to cover that person's time off, right? So having these conversations around what burnout looks like and how people are feeling burnout, talking about the wellness of your staff and how that impacts patient care, right? The information is there in the statistics. You can look up all you want. There's tons of studies out there that show how patient care and productivity decreases when we're burnt out. So it costs organizations more financially in the long run, right? Because we're going back to that preventative model. We want to catch it before it happens so we can save that money. Personal resiliency is not necessarily the answer. It's not individual resiliency. We need collective resiliency. We need team resiliency. We need the we, not the me, not the they, the she. The we needs to come into this conversation. We've got to look at the different occupations and disciplines and what their needs are for each, right? Evidence and tactics are available to address the problem. I'm giving you guys a lot of resources. It's here that you guys can look through stuff to propose. And we know interventions work. So when we start doing this stuff, people start feeling better. We also know that from studies. So these are conversations you can bring to your leadership if they're like, meh, I don't know about that. You can remind them gently of that. So I love this little quote: for every worry under the sun, there is a remedy or there is none. If there is one, hurry and find it. If there be none, never mind it. And there are answers. There are answers out there. So we're going to spend the rest of the time talking about kind of all the different things that you can do, you can try, things like that. Again, my son loves yoga. I'm a yoga instructor, and he loves yoga. We have all sorts of yoga books. We do yoga at night. We do yoga in the morning. This kid loves yoga all the time. But what you guys can do is you can learn to recognize the signs of distress, right? So that the green, yellow, orange, red, like those are really great tangible ways to look at how people are doing. And I'll show you something here in a little bit where people can do their own ones of those, so it can make it very individual. Trying to stay connected and encouraging people to reach out if they need help. Or if you notice somebody's struggling, when you talk to them in your weekly check-in, or you talk to them whenever you check in, pull them aside, like, how are you doing? Like, how are you really doing? Not just, oh, I'm good, I'm gonna go do. No, like, let's take 5 minutes and really say, how are you doing? How's your family doing? How's your daughter doing? How's your grandmother doing? Right? Because when we know the important people in people's lives, they feel like we know them, that we see them. Prioritize moments of joy and connection. Celebrate things that happen and go well in the clinic. Like at our staff meetings, we always talk about what went well and who gives kudos to who and how people showed up and thank you for doing that. And sometimes they're as little as so-and-so held the door open, or maybe they're bigger kudos that we get from patients, right? But celebrate those, talk about those, because we're in the trenches, right? We gotta have something to look out and see. We wanna see the flowers out there, right? Use your voice to advocate for positive changes, learning opportunities in your communities, coming to conferences, continuing education, all things like that really do help with burnout and stress. And getting back to the basics of good health habits, right? Practice what we preach. Do we preach get 8 hours of sleep a night? I mean, I don't know that you do or you don't, but if you do you get 8 hours of sleep a night? Are you getting 3 meals a day? Are you eating your vegetables or getting your fiber? Right? Sometimes there's a dissonance with what we tell patients to do and what we do for ourselves, right? Because we have the knowledge, right? We know it up here, but we have to bring it down here to live it, right? To bring action. I really liked what one of the speakers said is, love is action, right? It is a verb. So we love our patients and we show that, but how do we love ourselves? That is action too, right? Self-care isn't just getting bubble baths and manicures. Self-care is brushing your teeth in the morning, Self-care is taking a shower. Self-care is maybe going for a walk when you don't feel like you want to, but you need to. Self-care is doing the things you need for your future self to feel better. Does that make sense? So yes, massages are great, and I would love it if we got massages every week or somebody came in and give them. I would love that. But truth be told, some of the other things around self-care are cheap, easy, affordable. They don't cost anything, right? Did you eat today? Have you drinking water? Did you get lunch? Sometimes for our medical providers or our dental providers, I don't ever see them eat. I'm like, did you eat? Did you eat today? So check on people, right? Good health habits. Another thing that we talk about in therapy, so I'm an EMDR therapist, and we have this concept of container, but really what it is we're teaching compartmentalization skills, right? There's a right time and a place and a person to unpack the things that happen in our worlds, and until we get to that point, we can put it in a container. So whether you guide yourself through a little meditation, whether you write something down on a sticky note and put it in a book to file it away, but these are examples of some of my clients' containers. But when you're activated in something and you have to go to the next patient in the next room, but you just heard this horrific story of whatever, if you can take a moment or two, put that story in a container that will be locked, not forever. We're not going to pack everything in there forevermore, but put it in there so you can go and be present with the next person so that when you get home at night or when you meet with your supervisor, you take it out of that container and you unpack it. Does that make sense? We're not just shoving things down to never feel them or talk about them, but you're putting them on the side. And actually I find that medical workers are really good, maybe too good at doing this. You also have to learn how to take it out and process it. But yeah, one of my clients has a jar she puts things in. I've had another client send something like on a submarine down to the bottom of the ocean, chests, zircons. CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, has lots of techniques that you guys can all do, mindfulness being a really big part of that. Just noticing your body, noticing your sensations, noticing where you're at, smelling things, being present, all of those things. There's metta meditation, or the loving kindness meditation is a really nice meditation if you're feeling like a lack of empathy, because kind of what you do is you send yourself love and gratitude and joy, and then you send a friend love and gratitude and joy, and then you send perhaps somebody, I don't want to say enemy, but like somebody who's you disagree with, love and joy, and then you send it to like your community, your state. It gets global, but it's kind of a nice way to, it's just a tool people can use. Body movement, stretching, incorporating stretching into your workday. You're writing notes, you can bend down or something, or kind of looking at like the ergonomics of your clinic and how things settle. Are you sitting like this all day? Can you get up and stretch? Can you move around? Things like that are really helpful. Ho'oponopono, does anybody know what that is? Yeah. So Ho'oponopono comes from the Hawaiian Islands. And it's a way, you can look at it as a prayer or a mantra of forgiveness. And it's not just forgiveness of the person, it's forgiveness of yourself, it's forgiveness of any other energies, ancestral things that might be triggered in the moment. It's a really beautiful practice. If you're interested, you can Google it and find meditations or books and things like that. But it's something that's really a nice way to practice forgiveness. Because ultimately, forgiveness is for who? It's for me, so I don't hurt anymore about whatever it is, right? Me forgiving you isn't about you, it's about me letting go of things. So forgiveness is a big part of it. How are we out of time? Okay, so put on your psychological PPE, right? I love this infographic. It comes from the Institute of Healthcare for Improvement, but take a day off. Create space in between work and home life. Right, your transition time, your drive home. What are you doing on your drive home? Are you filtering through all the things you did at work? Are you letting go of things? Are you thinking about your grocery list? How are you getting separation time from home and work? Getting mental health support if you need it. Avoiding media coverage. I don't just say about COVID anymore, because it's not just about COVID anymore. Our media is yucky at times, and it's graphic at times, and it shows traumatic things at times. So however you filter your media, so you might not have to take in those images or hear those stories as much, right, is really essential to kind of decreasing some anxieties. Reframing experiences as positive or looking at, the bright side of things. Building a buddy system. maybe limiting time, things like that. So other things that I've seen done or we do at our clinic, this is Therapy. She's our clinic therapy dog. She comes on Thursdays. We call it Therapy Dog Thursdays. But she comes because she works with me. She works with the patients that I work with. And she's also there for staff. And she's there for patients that just walk by her and want to give her a pet, right? Get a little bit of oxytocin, the love bonding hormone that makes us feel good, that relaxes us. So there's animal-assisted interventions. You've also got creating positive work environment, continuing education. You could perhaps maybe integrate yoga or Tai Chi into things. I've worked in places where we did yogas in the morning, even if it was just a half-hour yoga flow or whatever prior to work. Our clinic, and probably most of your clinics do these, have prayer boxes, whether it's for staff or for patients, whatever. You can put things in the prayer box and ask to be prayed for. Our clinic does Bible study every Tuesday morning, which is a really nice thing for whoever wants to go to it, right? Team building, you could do all kinds of team building things, puzzle rooms or escape rooms or kind of all that kind of fun stuff. Potlucks, our clinic is big on potlucks because I think we just really like food, but food brings people together, right? For a lot of cultures, food is love, right? Nourishment is that. So maybe creating wellness plans for your clinic. I know one of the clinics in Colorado has a whole wellness plan system. If you do your annual exam and you do your dental exam and you do all the preventative care things and I don't know, they have a whole list of things. You get a certain amount of points, and if you get a certain amount of points, you get an extra day off. Right, some sort of like incentivizing, taking care of yourself, going to the doctor when you need to go to the doctor or the dentist or the mental health professional. Talked about celebrations, doing values work. There's a lot of different ways to do values work. John DeMartini has a really great way online. You can just Google motivational interviewing MI card sort. That'll give you about 110 values that you can choose from. But talking about values with your people. What are your personal values? What are our clinic values? What are our team values? Do all those things align? Because typically if they don't align, that worker isn't going to stay there because it's a misalignment with their values, right? So talking about that. And when we talk about values, then we can continue to match those values to what you're doing. How are you showing up? How are you helping people, right? If that's in your value set, it makes you feel like you're living to what you're being called to do, right? AccuDetox, does anybody in here do AccuDetox? Nobody's trained in it? Look it up. If you're a licensed professional, nurse, LCSW, LPC might be different in every state. Our state, social workers and counselors can do it as well as they have a license, but it's a 5-point ear acupuncture. And each ear, you do it for 45 minutes. It helps relax you. It helps engage the parasympathetic nervous system. It's great for sleep. It's great for folks who are wanting to quit smoking or quit some other sort of substance, but it's a quick and easy way to do that. I've done that in former places I've worked. We just, one Friday a month for like the last hour, we do AccuDetox and everybody come and relax, listen to music, essential oils. It was good. Practice self-compassion, praying together, creating rituals around how you show up for people and how you show up for staff and how you introduce staff and how you say goodbye to staff can also be really helpful, right? We live in a culture where we don't have very good endings. So create the endings. Even if it's not on a great term, try and create, bridge it a little bit if you can. Self-care plan, this is a self-care plan I did a couple years ago, but at least emotional well-being, spiritual, intellectual, and physical well-being, and then the transitions there. This is also a wellness plan that a clinic near us, Napayak, has shared with us, where they talk about what's your superpower and what's your strength, right? And trying to do this at the annual exams, so everybody's superpower, everybody's strength, what their goals are for things, and what they want to see, what they might be working on, right? What helps them feel resilient. So that's an example. And then you can do this too. So the resource on this has a lot of great stuff, but you could go through and have staff fill this out for themselves. When you're in that optimal green level, what do you think? Right, that's the CPEB. What do you think? How do you feel? Emotionally, how do you show up? And behaviorally, how do you show up when you're in the green? And then when you're in the reactionary, all those things. Injured and critical. Maybe you've never even been in the critical, but what might that look like? Maybe that looks like sleeping in on Saturday mornings, or maybe, I don't know, have these conversations with people and start creating awareness around what does it look like, or what could it look like when you're burned out, or you're approaching burnout, or you're fatigued. You don't have a lot of compassion or empathy this week, right? So this is a nice little thing that comes in that same handout. You could, instead of running to the next room or place to place, just take a deep breath. Instead of jumping in your car to go straight to work, you can sit and breathe in your car for a moment or two. Instead of ignoring the headache or the stomach ache or the knot in your stomach, just notice and name those sensations and where they're at and maybe what they're connected to. Get curious about them. Instead of rushing through your meal, maybe you can practice mindful eating, right? Noticing the flavors, the textures, smell it, touch it. We're meant to eat with all of our senses, right? We activate all of our senses when we eat. And instead of complaining, label what you feel. Oh, my legs are really tired. Instead of saying, oh, I'm just so sick of this, I don't want to do this anymore, you could say, oh, I'm tired today, like label it, or my eyes are tired, I want to close my eyes, things like that. Kind of reframing things. There's also a really great tool, it's called the Professional Quality of Life Scale, and this is free. Again, it has about 40 some odd questions, but what it's really trying to measure is compassion satisfaction, like how happy are you at your job, burnout, and then secondary trauma. So it measures these three things and gives you a little scale, like where do you fall? You could ask your staff, where do you fall? How burnt out are you? And it gives you very tangible, like where does your score fall and things like that. You can do this with your staff. It's a great resource. Grief. How do we process grief? How does your clinic process grief? When a client dies or passes away or is murdered, what do you do? What are the rituals or ceremonies? Like, what do you do collectively as a staff? For those providers involved, what do they need for support? Maybe they need an afternoon off. Maybe they need time to go to the funeral. Maybe they need to talk to somebody. Maybe they need the EAP services, right? The Employee Assistance Fund. But grief is really important part of this conversation that we don't always talk about because it's hard and it hurts, right? So creating places in your clinic around grief and when we lose people or other things. Loss just doesn't have to be people or to death or anything like that. But so they also have the stress continuum for your team. So if you're a manager or a leader, you can maybe look at this chart and be like, how's my team doing? Do a team check-in. Are we happy? Are we satisfying our mission? Or are we adrift a little bit? Are we coming towards mission fatigue? Or are we experiencing moral injuries, right? So very tangible way to kind of look at how we fall and where we fall on the spectrum.